We've called this session a board with all the benefits. Why? Because obviously many of us will appreciate that in order to successfully go about being able to do equity, diversity, and inclusion work, there is an importance of starting at the top, right? There's a very significant importance of starting at the top. But the challenge is, especially within small charities, this is part of Small Charities Week, a lot of times those people who end up being trustees and on our boards and therefore having that level of influence over the way an organization is run tend to be those that are part of our usual networks, you know, the people that already have a relationship and a love for the work we do. And that doesn't necessarily always mean that we're tapping into as diverse amounts of people as we would like in order to then have that representation at board level. So today we're going to try and break this down in terms of how we go about being able to overcome that challenge into three main areas. Before we do that, just a quick introduction to myself. So in terms of what I do professionally, one of the social enterprises that I co-run is called Revolution Hive. So that is a social enterprise that operates predominantly in the education sector. We do some work within the voluntary youth sector as well. But our mission is to equip young people for life beyond the classroom. So we go into schools, colleges, universities, and we run workshops and programs that focus on personal development, social leadership, and global citizenship. So that's the work we do with Revolution Hive, and we've been doing that for the last 5 years. Then 7PK is the hat that I'm wearing today. So 7PK is an organization that I set up a lot more recently. And the real mission behind 7PK is to give people from disadvantaged situations more equity within our society, for them to have more ownership over their social mobility journey. So we do a lot of program design and program delivery, as well as training and capacity building for organizations that focuses on either engaging people who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to support their movement through society, or doing a lot of work around equalities, anti-oppression, anti-racism, that kind of stuff. And then I've only recently started putting this on slides, but I have a little passion project that was really just an Instagram page that accidentally became like more than that, let's call it, because we've now started running courses and stuff. But basically, as a proud Caribbean man, I use soca music, which is the music of the Caribbean, as a vehicle to support people's personal development and self-mastery. So it started off with me just taking songs that people thought was just about jumping and waving and whining at carnival and going, maybe we're jumping to our goals. Maybe we're waving at the people that we need to support us in life. And anyway, it's a long story, but if you're interested in that, go to Instagram, Success Through Soca. So that said, what do 7PK do? So just to wrap up this intro, our work focuses on three main things in order to make the change that we want to make within our society. So we start off with looking at the individual. So that person who is in this challenging situation at the moment, how do we ensure that they are empowered by being able to better understand themselves, develop that core confidence that's needed, and raise their aspirations and their awareness of their own value in such a way that will lead them to hopefully take on board opportunities that are going to support them with being able to be more in control of their future. Then we look at opportunity, because you can empower the individual, but if organizations and institutions are not creating opportunities for those people who are now empowered, kind of doesn't mean anything, does it? So that's where we work with organizations to ensure that their opportunities are accessible and appealing and relevant to those people who may be disadvantaged. And then finally, we look at the system. So how do we ensure that those people who we have been able to get opportunities for, how do we ensure that they can sustain their progress within a particular space? Thank you so much for putting the handle there, Colette. Appreciate that. So that said, what does that mean in terms of today? So in terms of our objectives today, we're going to focus on three things. First of all, the culture that needs to start to develop internally within an organization in order to attract more diverse applicants to board roles. Secondly, we're going to look at evolving our recruitment and engagement process so that it ensures that those people who we're seeking to attract actually have more of an opportunity to progress through that recruitment and engagement process to hopefully then become those that have seats on our boards. And then finally, what are some new norms that we can start to develop to make it more inclusive for those people that we've been able to attract and put through those recruitment and engagement processes, so that once they are here, they feel as if they genuinely can make contributions that are going to move the needle. So a well-known situation, let's just set this scene. As I said before, if we are running organizations, or working with organizations that have tended to attract a similar audience more often than not, that is not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. However, it does give us an opportunity to look at how we can do better. But the challenge is, how do you start building those relationships? You know, how do you actually get to a point where people who are outside your normal sphere of influence feel compelled to want to come and engage with you, be that through, you know, an actual career or a board position? What leads that person who doesn't necessarily have an existing relationship to feel like, yeah, actually, that's somewhere that I can go about contributing to or making an impact? We can do as much as we'd like to try and sell it to them, but if they don't necessarily feel that connection already, it's going to be very hard. So the main thing that I want to explore throughout today's session is this concept of proximity. It's about how do we just make those people feel a bit closer to the work we do prior to the point of us even necessarily looking to attract people for board roles, as well as throughout that process, helping them to ensure that they do feel some close proximity to our organizations, so that way making the step from being someone who just maybe has an interest or an awareness in what we do to saying, actually, I want to get to a point where I can influence what we do. If you're someone who can relate to that, who feels like, yeah, do you know what, we'd actually like to engage with people who are outside of the normal community we engage with, but we do know that a lot of them don't necessarily have existing relationships with our organization, just put a yes in the chat. Just put a yes in the chat. If you can relate to that situation where it's like, we want to diversify, but it's not that easy because we don't necessarily have those pre-existing relationships with other communities, just put a yes in the chat. Because if you agree with me, you're with me on this one. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Katie. Appreciate that. So let's start with this first section, which is around developing that culture to start attracting diverse applicants, right? So there are there's actually two main things that I want to focus on here, but you'll see how we're going to break it down. So first and foremost, we need to start to value the discomfort that comes with going on a journey where we're seeking to be more diverse and more inclusive. Why do I say the discomfort? It is not necessarily straightforward when you are doing work around becoming more inclusive, making the working environment more equitable. It's not easy to have to face up to the fact that what you've been doing prior to this point might not necessarily have been given those people whose voices needed to be heard and experiences need to be understood. It's not easy to realize that actually you've been putting some barriers in the way of their voices being heard and their experiences being understood. You know, if we're doing work around anti-sexism, let's say, for example, it's very important that me as a man, I appreciate that we live in a patriarchal society that has for long times gone about disempowering women. And I therefore need to go, how do I use my male privilege to make this space more inclusive and more equitable? That's not necessarily comfortable. You know, I've worked with organizations where you can see certain men find that challenging. When you're saying to them, you do realize that how you show up might be perceived as toxic in terms of how you use your masculinity. Some of them don't want to hear that. You know, when we start to explore things around anti-racism and we talk about things like white privilege, it's not necessarily something that people feel so comfortable with. So what do I mean by valuing the discomfort and the process? First and foremost, a commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusion absolutely has to be made. Now, that is a commitment internally to say we are going to go on a journey to get to a point where we have an equal, a diverse, and inclusive environment. But then can we share that externally? You know, there are some organizations that I'm working with now where, having made those commitments, that's now on the front page of the website. First thing you see, our commitment to equalities. So now people who you're thinking, would they be interested in our board roles? That's the first thing they see. First thing they see is your manifesto, your commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusion. Now, you can have the organizational commitment, which I encourage as many people as possible in the organization to contribute to developing. Yeah, you want as many voices as possible in the organization contributing to the development of that manifesto. And if you can you also get some external input? So do you need to run focus groups and things, which we're going to cover later on? Do you need to run some focus groups and things to see if you can get some other input into the development of that? But then where is that published? So as I mentioned, it could be on the website. I would argue that in as many places as possible, it needs to be clear what your commitment is. So that way, that person who, you know, might happen to stumble across, you know, your job advert for a board role, and they're thinking to themselves, well, I don't know if I would normally apply for something like this, maybe because I'm from, you know, the LGBTQ community, and I'm kind of like, is this really an environment for me? Or, you know, like maybe I'm someone who's got a disability and I'm not so sure, or, you know, whatever it is, whatever their barrier is, if they see that, that might automatically make them go, yeah, do you know what? I feel like I might be welcome in that space. So we've got the organizational commitment, then we need the individual one. So what I mean by this is, I would say it must start with leadership. It must start with leadership, but definitely getting at minimum your leaders to have an individual commitment. So what does that require? When I do training around truly inclusive leadership, one of the things that I often suggest and I kind of guide people through is you can start with doing a 360 feedback process that allows leaders to do some of their own self-reflection, to look at how they show up at the moment as leaders and whether the way they show up and operate is actually inclusive. How are the leaders showing up currently? And in their opinion, based on how they show up, do they feel they are being as inclusive as possible? Now, some of them might turn around and go, yeah, I think I'm doing great. This is where the 360 comes in. Then we get anonymized input from colleagues, from other leaders, from people who are not necessarily in the leadership teams. We get those people to feed in and give them feedback on how they currently show up and whether they're being as inclusive as they could be. They compare their reflection with the 360 feedback they've got, and then they make a commitment themselves. As a leader in this organization, I am committing for the next 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year to improve my leadership and to be more inclusive by doing this, this, and this. So maybe they might say, I'm going to be doing this self-education. I'm going to look for this course that I can go on. I can do this, I can do that. And again, can we publish those? Can we make it public knowledge that the leaders are committing to their own journey of becoming more inclusive? Because again, by doing that, we see not only has the organization taken it upon themselves, but individuals who have influence on the organization have taken it upon themselves. And now people are more compelled to say, you know what, this looks like an environment where people are committed to actually doing this work. And therefore, maybe I am interested in applying for this board role. So that's our first step, valuing the discomfort and valuing the process. Then also under this point of the culture to attract diverse clients is capturing and sharing content of the organization on that journey. So what I mean by that is, if you're having brave space conversations to do with, you know, anti any form of oppression, from race to gender to sexual orientation, you know, to whatever it may be, documenting some of that, you know, sharing blog articles about, we had a brave space session the other day. You don't have to mention names, but actually we thought we were doing really well in this area and we realized we still got work to do here. Or actually we had a breakthrough in one of our sessions where, you know, people who found it really hard to have these conversations before were now feeling more ready. And we're proud that as an organization, we've done that. We know there's still work to do, but you know what I mean? Sharing that in the form of blog articles, in the form of videos, in the form of whatever the content style is there a way to document your journey? So again, that someone who's thinking about, should I engage with this organization? Am I interested in a board role? They can see the journey you're going on. So they've seen the commitment, but now they're seeing the journey. So share the obstacles you're facing, share the wins, let people know that your commitment that you made is something that you are actually looking to, you know, adhere to. And by doing that, again, people will start to develop an appreciation for the fact that this is a process, because people who are from backgrounds and communities that would not normally engage with our organizations, they're not naive. They know that an organization can make the commitment, but they're also looking to see, but are you really doing the work? So when they then see that that work is happening, we're documenting and sharing parts of that journey, that's when their level of interest and respect for the organization goes up. So as mentioned, documenting the journey, sharing the obstacles, sharing the wins. So I'm going to take a pause. I want to hear from people about those 2 points that I've made so far. So valuing the process and the journey, and also documenting and capturing content of the journey that the organization and individuals are going on. What benefits could this have for our organizations, or the benefits in terms of being able to introduce new people to our board? So just let me hear from 1 or 2 people. Anybody that would like to go first can, or I might just kindly call someone and see if they're willing to contribute for me. Colette, I can see you've unmuted though.
I've unmuted. I'm always ready with a question. No, I just thought that I would mention the fact that when I'm helping organisations to recruit trustees, the clearer the message about how inclusive that organisation is in terms of that recruitment, the more engaging and the more attractive that is to potential trustees. Just that statement about, we welcome new trustees or first-time trustees or trustees from diverse backgrounds, that is just such a gateway to greater interest and higher quality trustee experiences.
Without a doubt. Now, thank you so much for that, Colette. And that is so true. Just seeing those words alone can fill someone with a little bit of confidence they didn't have, you know? So thank you for that, Colette. Trisha, I can see you've unmuted as well.
Yeah. So as Sandra's already said about the board we've both been involved with, Sandra did a great job in recruiting some women who were a slightly alien species, and Sandra's led the way on that, obviously. But the board is overwhelmingly older people, mostly retired, and the sort of discussion you're talking about, which I'm very used to in terms of my previous career, I worked in public health, I know will be very difficult for some of those board members. And so it's the preparation, it's developing the strategy, getting people to actually commit to sort of some of those discussions. So it feels like quite a long way back, as it were, to come to the point of discussion about almost everything we've talked about. I think disability is probably the thing people cope with discussing best, but other things, their level of discomfort is high, which is why I'm having to take a sort of much steadier approach to this, as I'd hoped when I first spoke with Colette, because there's already a sign of discomfort in some people, and presumably you come across this regularly in terms of certain types of boards, particularly I think in some of the environmental charities where traditionally it's mainly been a very white, very middle class, very professional, and often initially very male at sort of leadership.
Oh, of course. No, you make it such a pertinent point, Trisha, because the discomfort is there because, again, if we talk about proximity, they may never have been exposed to some of the language, concepts, and things like that revolve around anti-oppression, right? So, you know, some people may never have come across terms like white privilege, or if we're talking about this from a racist standpoint for a second, but things like white privilege or white fragility, or, you know, stuff like that. And I think it's about getting okay and getting comfortable with using that language. So sometimes, you know, introducing resources that are external to an individual there, but maybe exist somewhere online, or a program that you suggest everybody watch, or whatever it is, and use that as a starting point for the discussion is always helpful. If you can introduce some sort of training that at least introduces people to language in the first instance and some of these key concepts, so then it does open up discussion, it's great. But my thing is always to come from the standpoint of, we are not attacking you, we're going on a journey. So one of the things I say to people in every environment, even if we just took racism for a moment, I have to wake up every day and decide to be anti-racist. I don't just automatically become anti-racist because I'm a black man. No, I actually have to wake up and decide, because I live in a system that has allowed racism to exist, which I've supported to uphold. I've helped uphold that system too. So I have to work. So often then I'm making clear to them, it's a journey for all of us. Do you get what I mean? None of us are perfect. You know what I'm saying? We're all trying to overcome our own biases all the time, overcome our own stereotypes, all of that kind of stuff. So we are in it together, and wherever we're starting from, doesn't matter. We're starting. That's the key thing, you know? And I think it's about inviting people to say, that's okay, you know? So, yeah, I think introducing people to language and concepts and letting them know it's a daily decision. And if we're willing to at least try, that's going to make a great start, you know? So, yeah, thank you for that, Trisha. Anybody else want to feed in? Sandra, Katie, Adam, and don't have to, but yeah.
Hi. I was just wondering about, I really like your idea of getting feedback for the leadership team, that kind of 360 feedback. I was just wondering, if we're a super small team, there's 2 of us. I was just wondering if you had any advice on sort of how to go about doing that for super small teams.
Well, beneficiaries is always a good start. Beneficiaries might be able to give you some of that feedback. Also, partners and or funders can also do it. I just think about whoever the stakeholders are that you engage with often enough for them to have an understanding of your working style, your approach to program design, your approach to program delivery, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. Whoever those stakeholders are who've had enough exposure to that, they're great to be able to get feedback from. And as always, encourage them to be brutal. That's what we're really looking for, you know?
Yeah, I think that's what I would worry, that they would just be too nice.
Nah, we want them to be brutal. Do you know what I'm saying? If anything, we want the people who seem to have an issue with us, because they might give us the realest truth. You know what I'm saying? They're the ones that we want it from. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem. Cool. So let me move on then. Of course, we'll have time later for questions, but let me move on to our next section. So we're gonna have times like that at the end of each section anyway. So let's look at evolving recruitment and engagement processes now. So first one, shadow boards and or scrutiny groups. So what I mean by this is, I was doing a training actually with a primary school that I'm doing a lot of work with at the moment around anti-racism and equalities. And, you know, one of the things we were speaking about was the fact that they are currently struggling with being able to get people from, you know, more diverse backgrounds to apply for their board of governors. And one of the things I said is, but you can create a shadow board. You know, you can create a group of people who don't need to necessarily feel it's so formal that they are now on the board itself, but have the opportunity to just scrutinize and or just get the opportunity to experience what it's like being on a board as a bit of a halfway house, the kind of work that your board is doing. So it's a stepping stone for them. You know, we said to them, look, you don't need to go through the formal process of becoming a governor, which, by the way, I became a governor of a federation of primary schools last year. And that was the amount of things I had to fill in and sign and do. I was just like, this is not even, I was like, listen, I feel like this is my first year tenure. Just to fill in these forms is the first year of my tenure, because this is a lot. So for someone who doesn't necessarily feel as if they want to take on that level of responsibility and go through that process yet and isn't so sure if they're confident, could we create a space whereby they can just, you know, drop into certain meetings, or maybe they have an opportunity to have a separate space to discuss the kinds of things that the board is about to discuss at an upcoming meeting, or to discuss what the board has spoken about at a recent meeting. Yeah, but it invites those diverse voices into decision making by making it, as I said, that halfway house where they don't feel it's so formalized just yet, but it gets them to a point where if they've been doing that for a few months or a year or whatever it is, it becomes easy to then go, oh, by the way, you know, we're actually recruiting for new trustees, and that step feels a lot smaller now. So, oh yeah, well, I've been providing some insights already, been sharing my experiences and my perspectives already. So now we've created a halfway house for them. The step feels a lot smaller. So as I say, that exposure and that experience they're getting leads to a lot of comfort. So those scrutiny groups, especially for those people who, maybe they are actually people who are from communities that we've heard murmurs, maybe don't necessarily love the work that we're doing. Maybe that's even more important for them to be a part of a scrutiny group for us. Because maybe they, again, as I said, they're not necessarily massive fans of our work, but then they're not massive fans of our work, but it's Chinese whispers. They haven't actually had enough exposure to the actual things that we're doing. They're just hearing hearsay. So by then giving them the opportunity to be in a scrutiny group, like, actually, yeah, we want you to tell us all the things that you have an issue with. Do you want to join our scrutiny group? Now, one thing I'll say, and I'll say it on the next slide as well, is that we should think about, is there a way of putting resource towards this? If we're going to invite people's voices, what is the way of being able to compensate them? Sometimes that is financial. So is it that we can pay for their time? Is it that there are other ways of being able to show respect for the fact that they're giving up their time, their experience, and their expertise? To assume people will do it for free, for absolutely nothing in return and no compensation, is quite cheeky of us. So we should think about how we can allocate resource to a process like this. But it is definitely an approach that can work, just because of the fact that it lessens the distance that they have from being someone who simply is aware of our work to someone who maybe ends up sitting as a trustee on our board. Similar to the previous point, but focus groups. So doing focus groups with people who are less represented. So the real value this adds in the first instance is now we can reach out to those organizations that we don't usually work with, that we know engage a set of beneficiaries or have relationships with communities that we don't currently have relationships with, and say, do you know what? Every 2 to 3 months, we'd love to just run a focus group with some of your beneficiaries to get some insights into the work that we're doing. What are their thoughts on it? Because we realize we don't have enough of their voices in the room. But you're doing those focus groups often enough that, again, those particular people from those communities and those backgrounds start to get used to hearing about the work that you're doing, hearing about the journey that you're on as it relates to whatever social impact you're trying to make. And so, again, what it does is it helps them to go, well, if they've got that much insight now and they've been sharing their voice through the form of a focus group, when you hit them 6 months later with, by the way, we're recruiting for new trustees, some of them might go, yeah, actually, do you know what? I'm up for that. But to reinforce the point I made before, what resource can we put towards compensating that engagement? Now, obviously, those organizations that you're reaching out to, you're going to have to do a bit of relationship building there, letting them know, look, we're just going to be quite open and let you know the reason we're engaging with you is because we're aware we don't engage diverse enough audiences at the moment, and we'd love to change that. We think the work you're doing is amazing. So what is a way of being able to develop some sort of partnership or relationship that allows us to be able to hear from some of your beneficiaries, and vice versa? Is it that a part of that compensation is maybe you're going to run some taster workshops and stuff like that for those beneficiaries to get an insight into the work you do? And that is the way of compensating them. You want to do your focus group, but maybe they don't really need some sort of financial compensation. They just love to be exposed to, all the work that's going on in the environmental sector because it's brand new to them. You know, that it might be their opportunity to get exposed to the arts through theaters and stuff, because it's brand new to them. You know, some of them, it might be their opportunity to engage with some faith-based work because it's brand new to them. So focus groups is another way to just increase that proximity and help make the move from an individual to a potential trustee a lot smoother. And then finally, this is something that Colette alluded to earlier in an amazing way, which is that throughout the whole recruitment and engagement process, how can we make it clear to potential applicants that we are seeking to shake up what we do currently? So prioritizing changes over tradition. So as opposed to saying we are looking for applicants who truly understand our heritage and our history and everything to do with how we currently do things, we're saying we're looking for people who are going to come in and give us a completely fresh perspective. If you think you have very little understanding of the work we do, that's exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for people who are going to bring completely new eyes to this thing. We're looking for people who, yeah, they appreciate the journey we've gone on so far, but we are genuinely looking for people that are going to have a perspective that we've never heard from communities, ideally, that, you know, we've very rarely engaged. Making that clear to people that we are prioritizing changes over traditions, again, not only does it give them the confidence that they can come in and truly speak their mind, but also it helps them to appreciate that they don't have to know everything about our journey so far in order to add value. Their value is not predicated on a previous relationship with us. Their value is not predicated on, you know, a previous experience they've had with us or everything to do with our journey so far as an organization. And we're making that very clear to them throughout every stage of the recruitment. So through the questions we ask in an interview space, to the things that we put on our application forms, to the way we design the job descriptions themselves, to the information that we share when inviting them to an interview. Throughout all of that process, we're letting them know we are looking for people that's going to shake it up, and we encourage them to share whatever cultural experiences they may have, letting them know that's more than welcome. Again, by doing so, it allows those people to feel more safe and more comfortable throughout the recruitment and engagement process. So just to recap, we've got the prioritizing changes over traditions. We've got our focus groups with those who are less represented within our environment at the moment, to look at how does that go about starting to build relationships with both the individuals and the organizations they may be connected to. And then we've also got our shadow boards and scrutiny groups, you know, so effectively creating a halfway house for certain people who may not be so sure if they're ready to take the jump to trusteeship. So all of that said, another moment to pause. It'd be good to hear from people, you know, what either opportunity you think some of these suggestions pose for you. What challenges might you face with trying to actually go about applying these things in your environment? What questions might you have? So again, open to the floor.
Yeah, I think this is all really helpful, and I can see huge benefits from some really practical ideas you've got in terms of the focus groups or the shadows or shadow boards or whatever. I suppose the challenge, which is a rubbish one, but the challenge is that all of these things take more time, and so I suppose it's just being really, really clear with anyone involved in these processes that in order, if we are so bad, any of our organisations, that we want to make these big changes, we're going to have to invest time in it.
Mm-hmm.
In order to make it happen. There isn't any quick fixes or quick wins, and that we need to take a bit of a long view on it. You know, if we know we've got some vacancies coming up in a year's time, we need to be starting some of this work now in order to have people who we've met with enough times to think, yes, I might be up for those vacancies. You know, it's not just an overnight thing, but it's really good that you're giving us sort of really specific practical steps that we can be taking, which is really helpful. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for that, Sandra. I appreciate it. And you know, you're so right. And that's the thing, like, I am very aware that none of these are quick fixes. And I hold my hands up to that, but I do it unapologetically, because the fact of the matter is, and I know me and Colette have spoken about this before, the difference between diversity and inclusion is diversity is numbers, but inclusion is experience, right? So if our goal is solely to be diverse, but we are not inclusive, our retention is not going to be good. What people say about us is not going to be good. the experience we create for people is not going to be good. So we've got to look at diversity hand in hand with the inclusion. So what we're doing here is we're also going to learn. When we have that shadow board and we're asking them for feedback on how they're finding that experience, that's going to shed a light on how inclusive we are as well. So we're doing it with a goal of increasing diversity in 6 months' time, a year's time, whatever. But it's also going to tell us how inclusive we are. When we're doing when we're doing the focus groups, it's also going to tell us, you know, the way in which we have chosen to facilitate a discussion in that space. Have people felt welcome? Have people felt like their voice can be heard? It's going to tell us something. When we're also prioritizing changes over traditions within the recruitment process, and we also not only give people feedback on why they may or may not have become a trustee, but we also ask them, how inclusive did this process feel? We're going to learn some things. So I agree with you, Sandra. It's definitely about playing the game that we can sustain. You know, I don't want to call it the long game because it might not be that long, but it's about playing the game in a way where we can actually sustain the progress that we're making, as opposed to, right, we got some more diversity on the board now. We got more women, we got more people of color, we got, you know, more people who are, you know, for example, LGBTQIA plus. We've got, you know, right, that's great. How long do they stay? How inclusive do they feel? To use the same example of the primary school, and I say this with absolutely no disrespect towards them because they're amazing people, but one of the things I don't think they've necessarily been as proactive at doing is picking up on the fact that since I've become a governor, I think I've attended 2 meetings. Now, don't get me wrong, I thought in the space of 7 months, 2 meetings was great. Little did I know when I signed up as a governor that they have meetings. I feel like they have meetings every week. I feel like they're just talking all the time. I'm thinking to myself, what on earth are we meeting about? Like, and their meeting dates are always changing and I keep missing things. And I felt the other day, I felt bad. I was like, I keep missing meetings. Like, they ratified the budget last week. I missed that. Like, but I thought to myself, at no point has anybody from this board actually reached out and said, Louis, as the only Black person on this board and probably the youngest, how's your experience been so far? They've not done that. Now, that's not a bad, to be fair, we're going to talk about that in a second, but maybe they could have picked up on that. I'm just throwing it out there. So, yeah. Anybody else want to feed in?
I suppose it's just something, shadow boards, I'm the mechanisms and that kind of thing, I suppose is how it would work. I'm not sure about it, but what I think is really interesting for me there is, and Colette will, I'm sure, say the same thing, is, you know, over the years I've met lots of potential trustees who have been very often middle class white people who lack real confidence themselves to join a board. And actually there's the confidence thing. I think there's that thing about people stepping up from all backgrounds, but I wonder if there is an added from some of those community, you know, from the communities, the diverse communities that we want to attract, whether there's that added barrier. So I think that idea of a shadow board or something where people can be eased in of all backgrounds, but can be eased in is really, really important. So I think that's one of the things I'm really interested in taking away and thinking about how we might do that. Whether it's a shadow board, I don't know, but the confidence thing seems to be the biggest issue of people joining boards, full stop, for everyone. But so I just think, we might, and I suppose, do we need to do more for some of our diverse communities on top of that? Thinking about, confidence might be an issue, but obviously what are the other barriers? So sorry, I'm just saying, I think it's a really interesting point, I suppose, is what I'm saying. I hadn't really thought about it, so thank you.
No, that is brilliant. Thank you for that, Adam. Definitely. That is what the shadow board's there to do, is to increase confidence. It's exposing them to an environment that becomes less and less scary over time, so that it gets to a point where actually then they feel a lot more comfortable with being able to contribute in spaces like that. You know, being able to challenge us on how we do things, being able to make commentary, being able to ask questions. They're just getting comfortable with being in that space and developing those habits. So then when someone explains to them that the opportunity to actually go to a formal trustee is available, they can draw a comparison and go, I've been doing that already, innit? So, yeah.
Can I ask a supplementary question?
Go for it.
Because I suppose my concern, worry, whatever about it is it's great for people who don't have confidence, but could it also be taken by anyone as, oh, so you don't trust me enough to be on the proper board? You're giving me the opportunity to do the shadow board, and I suppose it's just that balance. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, we're not good enough to join the real board, we have to join a shadow board. So I suppose it's thinking about how you would manage that balance between helping people who lack confidence, but also then not being seen to be not giving a full experience to someone. I suppose it's how we manage it and how we communicate it.
Well, it would be self-selecting, wouldn't it? You know, the fact of the matter is, if a person has chosen to put themselves forward to the shadow board, what we've done is respected their decision, haven't we? So that really and truly, we've been as respectful as possible to their desires.
Totally. That makes sense. Sorry, I hadn't really clicked that.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Thank you.
And that's a key thing within anything to do with inclusion is how do we ensure that the voice, the needs, the safety, and the advocacy of those people who are underrepresented gets elevated, you know? So yeah, thank you for that, Adam. Cool. So let me go into our final section then, so we can wrap this up. So this is about developing inclusive board norms. So 2 more things to share before we open out for any further Q&A if we've got time. So the first one is around coaching and support. So I alluded to the story about the primary school that I recently became a governor of already. And it begs the question of, you know, considering I am a first-time governor, never been a governor of a school before, begs the question of, could they have considered, and therefore could we as organizations leaving today also consider what coaching support comes for a person who may be from an underrepresented background or who's a new trustee? What support are they given to be able to get more comfortable and confident in that environment? So that coaching could be internal. So it could be from other members of the board. So they might have a buddying system, which I hope a lot of us already have, but also external. Because sometimes there are things that they still need to work through that they're not actually still so confident they can bring up to the person who's their buddy on the board. So sometimes having some wraparound coaching that comes from an external source is also recommended. But what does that coaching and that support entail? So it might be about improving their understanding of how to analyze board papers, you know, building their confidence of being able to speak up and challenge in meetings. Because, you know, I often find that when I look at organizations that I'm working with, and I look at the spread of people who are from different backgrounds and communities, those that are often underrepresented tend to be the least likely to just go about challenging a point, to just go about speaking up without being invited. I genuinely believe those are metrics that organizations should measure. I'm a bit pedantic like that, but I think we should actually have a dedicated role in certain meeting environments where someone is just there to observe what people spoke up or challenged things the most on an ongoing basis. Yeah. And then they can actually look at that from a metric standpoint and goes, oh, people from these backgrounds, these communities tend to be more likely to speak up and challenge things, whereas those that are from these backgrounds tend not to be. So, what does that mean then in terms of our ability to make those people feel fully empowered in this space? I think if we actually had data on that, it would open the eyes of a lot of organizations. But anyway, finally, also raising the awareness of the value that they are adding, whether they realize it or not. So those people who are from those backgrounds that don't necessarily have representation on our boards and we'd like to increase it, helping them to appreciate what adding value looks like. Because sometimes their perception of what adds value can be quite challenging for them, because in their mind, it's like, if I don't have a specific a specific point to make that revolves around how we're going to go about moving from this part of the organization's theory of change to this part, then I'm not adding enough value. But actually, no, sometimes it's just, you know, you asking a question that causes us to think in a way that we didn't think about before. That is valuable. So can their coaching also help them to appreciate the fact that there are different ways of being able to add value as a board member. So that way, again, their level of confidence in their ability to contribute in that space goes up. So we've covered coaching support, internal and external. So then to finish up, the other thing that I wanted to suggest is about dedicated time. So it's about having dedicated time, whether it be before, during, or after meetings, whereby people who are either new to the board space or who come from those less represented backgrounds and communities, there is a dedicated space and time for them to contribute. Especially if they're new and they're not necessarily feeling so confident in their first meeting or first couple of meetings. So Lewis, what do you think? Maybe I do need that. Okay, do you want to get together a couple of days before or 15 minutes before the meeting or whatever it is, based on what's on the agenda, for us to talk through some things you'd like to contribute? So then that person doesn't necessarily feel thrown on the spot. They're still trying to get their head around it, you know? They're still trying to get to grips with what might be a valuable contribution. They're still trying to get to grips with what the heck's going on in all of these pre-reading papers. Is there some dedicated space and time before, during, and after meetings for their voice to be heard? It might be that during the meeting, we allocate 5 or 10 minutes just on the agenda for those people to be able to have the chance to share, so they know that they don't necessarily have to come in just at random, but there's already a dedicated space and time for them if necessary. And if it's not during the meeting, it could be before and after as suggested. because it provides that time for further consideration, provides that time for them to really think about what they've had shared with them, as well as how that sits with them. How does that relate to their cultural experience, their previous experiences? How does that relate to people from their communities potentially? And it's not about making them the sole spokesperson of their community, because that's unfair to them, but it is about letting them know, remember, we do invite you to openly share from your experience how people who are from a similar community to you might also respond to that situation. Not expecting them to have all of the answers, but allowing them to bring that cultural experience into the space. Because what all of that does is it just ensures that their role in decision making is truly accounted for. It ensures that we haven't overlooked them just because of the fact that they didn't have much to say. We might go to them, so what do you think? And then they're like, well, I'm not really sure right now. And we go, okay, no problem. And we move on. Can we create that time, as I say, before, during, or after, to ensure that even though they said at the time when we just threw it at them, I'm not so sure, after a while, they might have had time to process. Before the meeting, they might just want an opportunity to talk through with someone. I'm thinking about this, but is that okay to share? By us making that bit of time with them before a meeting, they might then be able to make that contribution in a way where they feel more confident. So all of that said, that brings us to the end. So we can have any reflections, key takeaways, questions about anything shared or just from that last section. But yeah, that brings us to the end.